Hello again, gamers. Welcome back to Board Game Captain. I'm the Board Game Captain, and today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 movies that make me want to game. So the idea for this list is these are all movies that I enjoy, but it's not necessarily rated by how much I like the movies. It's rated by how much these movies put me in the mood to play tabletop games. That's the idea. So for the first off, I excluded movies that make me want to video game because I'm really focusing in on tabletop games because that's what the channel's about. But yeah, so there's not really much more to say about this. This is kind of like a little bit of a fun off-topic list. So without any further ado, let's get to the list. Number 10. So my number 10 favorite movie that makes me want to game is the first movie ever made based on an actual board game, which is why it makes me feel like I'm in the mood to play a game. And that is Clue. Now, there have been one or two other board game movies, but I still think that Clue is probably the best. And until we actually see more movies made on board games, which, I mean, who knows? Recently, they actually seem to finally figure out how to make movies based on video games. So maybe good movies based on board games might not be that far away. But that being said, this was a good movie based on a board game. So it's based on the classic game of Clue, which is, of course, a deduction game where you have to figure out who committed the murder, in what room, and with what weapon. So they took that concept and they turned it into a classic sort of comedy whodunit. It feels like an old school mystery novel crossed with Monty Python with a lot of goofy gags and funny stuff. And it's pretty great. Now, Clue itself is not a game that I really play anymore, but there are plenty of modern deduction games that this puts me in the mood for. One right off the bat that I can think of is Mysterium, especially with the fact that this movie has 3 different endings, and you can basically pick which of those endings you think is the best and decide that that's how it actually ended. Similar to the fact that everybody who's playing Mysterium has one set of person, place, and thing, and then you got to figure out which one of those is the actual real one. So my number 10 movie that makes me want to game is Clue. Number 9. Now, my number 9 movie that makes me want to game is Labyrinth. This is Jim Henson's Labyrinth from all the way back in the 1980s. This was a fantastic, fantastic movie. Now, fairly recently, I had been sent a review copy of the Labyrinth role-playing game and I had reviewed it. It's really good. It's really fun. So that single game alone would be enough for me to want to put it on this list, but I think this might have made the list before I played that game. And the reason is, Labyrinth is a lighthearted, fairy tale-ish fantasy adventure movie. And in that regard, it reminds me of plenty of lighter weight, entry-level role-playing or storytelling type games. So lighter than the role-playing games, because there are plenty of very light role-playing games, but lighter than that, you even have plenty of just fantasy storytelling games. Things like Once Upon a Time, for instance, where you tell out a fairy tale and there's really no risk of the characters dying, and you can be very lighthearted with it and run into all sorts of strange and interesting fairy tale creatures. These sort of games, along with, of course, the actual Labyrinth role-playing game now, watching this movie really puts me in the mood to play these sort of light-hearted role-playing games or lighter storytelling games. And that's why number 9, for me, is Jim Henson's Labyrinth. Number 8. Now, my number 8 is a bit of a sci-fi mystery thriller with amazing amounts of style and substance, and, I mean, mood for days. This is a classic, kind of a cult classic movie. It's got a devoted fan base, of which I have been one of since the very beginning, and that is Dark City. Now, Dark City, if you haven't seen Dark City, I highly recommend it. I more recommend the director's cut over the theatrical cut. The theatrical cut was good. The director's cut is better, in my opinion. Significantly better. It slows the pace down a bit, which I think it really needed. And it takes out the silly text on the screen at the beginning, which ruins the twist, which I will not ruin here in case your first time watching it, is the director's cut. Which mainly was forced in by the studio because they think that we're all too stupid to get a mystery in a movie. Dark City is awesome, and what Dark City makes me want to play is the sort of role-playing games with dark, either cyberpunk or steampunk or gaspunk universes. The storyline itself reminds me of one of those sort of one-off convention games you would play in one of those amazingly cool, gritty cyberpunk role-playing games, of which there are too many to name. There are so many in that kind of genre. A one-off convention game that you would play where the whole game is a mystery about what's going on, why is the world all messed up, and you find out by the end of that game. Those sort of really cool self-contained stories in convention role-playing games are always some of my favorites to play. I always find them so creative and so awesome, especially because they are truncated down to a single game so that you don't need to play a whole campaign because you don't have time for a campaign when you're at a convention. You want to play lots of other games. But yeah, this movie feels like one of the best possible storylines for a one-off, gritty, dark, futuristic sci-fi game like that. And that is why Dark City is my number 8. Number 7. Okay, so for my number 7, we've got a zombie movie in here, and there are many zombie movies to choose from, and this is by no means my favorite zombie movie, but this is the one that makes me most want to game. Like I said, this list is not in order of how much I like the movies, it's in order of how much these movies make me feel like I'm in the mood to play a game afterwards. And this is the remake of Dawn of the Dead. And the reason the remake of Dawn of the Dead is in here, rather than say the original Dawn of the Dead, rather than say Night of the Living Dead, rather than say Return of the Living Dead, or any of the other amazing, like at this point, unbelievable, or Train to Busan, etc., all the unbelievable amounts of zombie movies that are out there, is that I feel like Dawn of the Dead really captured that amazing combination of action movie and horror movie to a perfect degree that it really makes me feel like I want to play zombie board games and zombie role-playing games, which also go for that kind of hybrid of action and horror. Because you gotta have those crazy action scenes where you're taking down the zombies, but also you gotta be afraid of the zombies, and if your character dies, or when your character dies, it should be in a significantly horrific way, like many of the characters do die in Dawn of the Dead. Now, in regard to this, I do want to give an honorable mention that if it wasn't for the fact that I didn't want to double up on too many themes, might have made the list, which is Train to Busan, because it also comes very close to Dawn of the Dead, with that nice mix of action and horror. But my number 7 is Dawn of the Dead, the remake. Number 6. My number 6 movie is on this list because it is up there as one of the best examples to show people. It is not the best example, that's coming up later on this list, but it is one of the best examples to show people what it's like to form a party and go on an adventure in a fantasy role-playing game, specifically like a lot of the classic fantasy role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder, etc. And that is Kroll. So Kroll really feels like a group of adventurers going on a quest to defeat the big bad guy and save the princess. This is old school role-playing through and through. The storyline in Kroll is fairly basic. big bad guy comes down from space with his magical flying black fortress and his army of alien monstrosities, the Slayers, and they're conquering the world. And the thing is, the reason he's come to the world of Kroll is because there's this prophecy that this woman with an ancient name will choose a husband to be her king, and they will rule the world of Kroll, and their child will rule the galaxy. And the thing is, the beast, who is the lord of the Slayers, wants to force her to choose him. But her real chosen fiance gets a group together, and they go out on this adventure to kill the beast, save the world, rescue the princess, and along the way, they pick up a healer, they pick up some fighters and rogues, they pick up a shapeshifter, they pick up a cyclops, and they go on this amazing adventure where the climax is absolutely fantastic. This is one from the early 80s, and it is one that I do feel still actually, if you're cool with the campiness and not needing a super deep story, and you like the theme of a movie that's going to get you into the mindset of playing a fantasy role-playing game, I do think Kroll holds up today, and that is why Kroll is my number 6 movie that gets me in the mood to game. Number 5. Now, for number 5, I have a pair of movies from the same series that are very similar to theme with each other. Either one of them could have taken this spot, and I just wanted to talk about both. And these are both from the Mad Max series, but specifically, I'm talking about Mad Max The Road Warrior, which is the second Mad Max movie. In most of the world, it was called Mad Max 2. In the United States, it was called The Road Warrior. And also the fourth movie in the series, Fury Road. Now, both of these are very similar. They both have huge chase scenes. They both involve fighting off wasteland raiders, and they both, of course, involve the post-apocalypse. And these games make me want to game in the post-apocalypse. There are tons of games that make me think about the post-apocalypse. Some of my favorites that come right to my mind when I watch either one of these movies with their awesome chase scenes and trying to hoard the important resources, things like water and gasoline, etc., are one, Wasteland Express Delivery Services one. That really, it's a full board game where you're driving around, fighting off raiders, delivering goods from one post-apocalyptic community to another. So it feels like a larger world that Mad Max would be set in. One of the Mad Max movies would just be like one little segment of this world. And then one that directly makes me think specifically of those chase scenes is Gaslands, which is a tabletop miniature game where for the miniatures you use Hot Wheels cars and you play out like a race where fighting happens and you fight back and forth. And there's lots of other great post-apocalyptic games out there. These are just a couple examples, but watching Fury Road and The Road Warrior really make me want to game in these games. And it's very tough for me to pick just one of them. They are both really similar, and I go back and forth about which one is my favorite. So that's why the Mad Max series, I guess you could say, is my number 5. Number 4. Number 4 on my list, I almost cheated again and picked another series, but I decided to pick one specific movie out of the series, the one that makes me want to game the most. And that is Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. Now, I'm not saying Rogue One: A Star Wars Story is my favorite Star Wars movie, but what I am saying is that the battle action scenes in it, I have now decided are my favorite. It took me a while to come around to this. It was very difficult. The thing is, though, Rogue One had both amazing space-faring action scenes with the huge battle over Scarif, as well as amazing ground battle scenes on the ground on Scarif. And the thing is, like in the classic trilogy, usually you didn't have both of those in one movie. Empire Strikes Back had amazing ground battle scenes with the battle on Hoth, and Return of the Jedi had amazing space epic battle scenes with the Battle of Endor. But the ground battle in the Battle of Endor was far less interesting, and the space fight scenes in Empire Strikes Back were far less interesting. Whereas here, they kind of got the best of the fights in both those movies and put them in one movie. And like if I'm just looking to look up highlights from Star Wars battles on YouTube, which is something I do, the movie I find myself most often watching the battle scenes again of is Rogue One. And I mean, the game right off the bat that it really makes me want to play and I want to throw out there is Star Wars Armada, because that spaceship battle scene is fantastic. I love when the Rebel fleet warps in and they start fighting with the two Imperial Star Destroyers, and all the fighters come out. It's just fantastic, and it makes me want to play Star Wars Armada specifically. And that's why Rogue One is my number 4 movie that makes me want to game. Number 3. My number 3 movie shares a lot in common with why it's on the list with my number 9, but nothing in common otherwise. The reason it's on the list is twofold, just like my number 9, which was Labyrinth, in that, one, there has fairly recently been a game specifically with this IP that I adore, and 2, even before that, it was a style, a feeling that I enjoyed playing. And this is the Alien role-playing game. So the Alien role-playing game, I was excited for this as soon as I heard that Free League had gotten the rights to do games in the Alien universe, and they were going to be making an Alien role-playing game. I was super excited. They sent me a review copy of it, and I was blown away. This is my number 1 favorite. Number 1, I got to repeat that. Number 1 favorite horror role-playing game of all time. Absolutely adore this game. And the thing is, that's where I was at in regard to the movie Alien before this role-playing game came out, is that the movie Alien is one of, if not my very favorite, horror movie of all time. Love the movie Alien. Love the creepy feeling of isolation, the nervousness, never knowing when it's going to come for you, them slowly getting picked off one by one until just Ripley and Jonesy the cat are left. This movie is fantastic, and Alien has always been one that puts me in the mood to play a one-off horror game, especially in systems like, say, Dread, where you know everyone's going to die, or at the best, one person will be alive at the end. It puts me in the mood to play things like that, because that's exactly how the movie is structured. But now, way better than some of those other role-playing games that it used to put me in the mood for, they actually have a really fantastic Alien role-playing game that, if you play a game based on the first Alien movie, will be structured like that, where you will all be, either all or almost all of you are going to die as you are slowly picked off by the monster or monsters. Yeah, Alien is a phenomenal movie. If you like horror movies and you like hard sci-fi and you have never seen the movie Alien, you gotta see the movie Alien. And yeah, Alien makes me want to play those sort of one-off games, either for a party or at a convention of horror role-playing games. And that's why it's my number 3 movie that makes me want to game. Number 2. Now, my number 2 movie that makes me want to game, this is all about a theme that I love, a historical time period that I love playing games in, and it's Master and Commander Far Side of the World. I love the Age of Sail combat, and specifically the Napoleonic Wars Age of Sail fights are fantastic. I mean, literally, all you have to do is tell me that your game, if you've made a game, takes place in the 1800s and somehow simulates sail-to-sail combat, and I'm probably interested. So some of my favorite games that really make me feel like they, well, my number 1 I have to mention, right out of the gate, that really, for me, captures the feeling I get when watching the amazing ship-to-ship battles in Master and Commander with the cannons going off and people going flying and the officers screaming out orders, is definitely Sails of Glory. Sails of Glory is a tabletop miniature game that, if you watch my channel, you probably know I'm a big fan of, and it is tons of fun. And that is the one that most closely catches that feeling for me. But a few other games, just to throw some others out, that also I've been a big fan of, that also this movie makes me in the mood to play. are 1750 Britain versus France, which is another game I have touted on the channel quite a bit, as well as Nexus Man of War, which is a completely abstract strategy game, but allows you to abstractly have a fleet of ships and battle it out. Master and Commander is a fantastic movie that takes place in the Age of Sail, where you are with a British frigate that is hunting a French larger frigate that is almost on par with third-rate ships of the line for the time period. They are greatly outclassed, but still they come up with strategies and ways to possibly come out on top. I don't want to ruin the ending for you. It has been called by some historians one of the most accurate historical representations in a film. It's not perfect, but it's phenomenal. And I highly recommend the movie Master and Commander Far Side of the World. Also, wonderful performances by some amazing actors in there and unbelievably great direction. So there you have it. Master and Commander Far Side of the World is my number 2 movie that makes me want to game. And now it is time for number 1. And now it's time for my number 1. And I did a little bit of a cheat here and did a whole series, but I have a reason for it. This series is really just one story, and it is based on a series, it is a trilogy, based on a trilogy of books that themselves were originally written as one book, but the publisher forced the author to split it up. Yes, it's Lord of the Rings. Of course it's Lord of the Rings. All modern fantasy games owe their entire theme to Lord of the Rings. Nobody showed the various fantasy races, dwarves, elves, orcs, halflings, in the form that they now appear in all modern fantasy games, whether it be board games or role-playing games. Nobody showed them in that way, the way that we all accept that they just are, until Tolkien. Tolkien created that image of the dwarf, of the orc, of the elf, and then Dungeons & Dragons borrowed it. And then other games borrowed it. Because Dungeons & Dragons was a big success. It was the first big one to really borrow it. And then, I mean, other role-playing games and other fantasy board games all the way from the 70s to now have been using those images to the point where we just think of all of those fantasy races as looking and being like they were in those books. And when the movies finally came out, and I mean, those were live-action movies I was waiting my entire life to see on film, because I've always been, basically since I was old enough to even before I could read, when I was old enough to listen to my dad read to me at night, and he originally read the Lord of the Rings trilogy to me, I have been waiting for a live-action Lord of the Rings series. And the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings movies are probably the greatest series of movies ever made. I'm just going to throw that out there because I can't think of another full series that keeps up that level of quality throughout the whole series. We're not going to talk about The Hobbit, but the Lord of the Rings trilogy is phenomenal. And like I said, all modern fantasy gaming owes everything to Tolkien. So there you have it. That is my top 10 list of movies that make me want to game. So tell me in the comments down below, what movies make you want to game? And if you're in a position to and like to help out the channel, you can join my Patreon, get access to early videos, see them before anybody else, as well as the ability to vote on things and such. Also, if you would like to buy any of my gamer gear merchandise, there is a link in the description down below to my Teespring store where you can get any of the cool shirts or mugs in tons of different colors that you're seeing up on the screen now. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on.